Most Christians know Jesus was crucified, but many don't realize Islam teaches something completely different. The Qur'an says Jesus was not killed and was not crucified, so this is not a small disagreement. It is one of the biggest differences between Christianity and Islam. And once you understand why Islam denies the crucifixion, you start to see how deep that difference really goes. The key passage is Surah An-Nisa 4157. They neither killed nor crucified him, it was only made to appear so. So according to the Qur'an, Jesus did not die on the cross. But here's the important part. The Qur'an denies the crucifixion, without clearly explaining what happened instead. That's why different explanations developed later. In Islam, Jesus is highly honored. He is called the Messiah, born of a virgin, performs miracles, but he is not God, and his death is not seen as an atonement for sin. So the crucifixion is rejected first for theological reasons. From that perspective, God would not allow one of his greatest prophets to be publicly humiliated and executed. But Christianity says something very different. Jesus says in John 10:18, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord." So the cross is not a defeat. It is intentional. That's the starting difference. Now step out of theology for a moment. Historically, the crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most widely accepted events in ancient history, not just in Christian sources. It is also affirmed by writers like Tacitus and Josephus. Tacitus records that Jesus was executed under Pontius Pilate. Josephus, in a passage that scholars debate in its exact wording, still preserves a reference to Jesus being condemned under Pilate. So even outside the New Testament, the crucifixion is part of the historical record, which leads to a simple question. If Jesus was not crucified, where did this belief come from? The most common Islamic explanation is the substitution theory. It teaches that Jesus was not crucified. Someone else was made to look like him and was crucified instead. But this raises several problems. First, no early historical source identifies this substitute. Second, it would mean the disciples were mistaken, the Roman authorities were mistaken, the Jewish leaders were mistaken, and the earliest historical records all preserved the wrong conclusion. That's not just a disagreement, that's a complete historical reversal. So the question remains, who was crucified, and why is there no record of him? Another explanation is that Jesus was crucified, but did not die. That he survived. This is most commonly associated with later or minority interpretations, not the dominant classical view. But it still raises serious issues. Roman crucifixion was designed to ensure death. And the Gospel of John records, John 19:34. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. Even setting theology aside, the idea that someone could survive that and then convince others he had conquered death is historically difficult to support. A third explanation stays closest to the Quranic wording, that it only appeared that Jesus was crucified. But this raises a deeper question. Appeared to whom? Because the belief that Jesus was crucified appears early, widespread, and across multiple independent sources, Christian, Roman, and Jewish. So if it only appeared that way, the appearance was strong enough to shape the entire historical record. That creates a theological tension. Why would God allow a false belief about a major prophet to become so universal? There's also a timeline issue. The crucifixion is proclaimed immediately in early Christianity. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1:23, "But we preach Christ crucified." That's first-century belief. The Qur'an comes about 600 years later and denies that event. So the tension is not just theological, it's historical. The earlier sources say one thing, the later source says another. For Christians, this is not a small detail. The crucifixion is central. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15:17, "And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins." No crucifixion means no resurrection, which means no gospel. So this is not just a disagreement about history. It's a completely different understanding of who Jesus is. So, when Islam honors Jesus, it does so in a very different way than Christianity. It affirms him as a prophet, but denies his crucifixion, his atoning death, and his resurrection as Christians understand it. And historically, that denial raises a serious question. It comes centuries after the earliest sources, and it goes against the strongest evidence we have. So don't just take claims at face value. Check the evidence. Read it in context. Then decide. If you're ready to learn, grow, and speak truth in love, join us, subscribe now. The conversation starts here.